Hello and welcome to the Arbitrarium podcast. I'm your host David Perry, longtime pedant, first-time host. Today my guest is Garrett Harriman, American by trade and self-proclaimed ass man. Our topic this evening is identity, both personal and social.
We need to introduce our
Yes,
moderator and fact checker.
Right.
We recently hired someone to help us out since all the other ladies in our life decided to abandon us.
Damn kids.
I know, right? Would you care to say your name and
Sure.
social security number for the record?
Like the enigmatic figure Prince, I have one name, and that is Kirky. My real identity shall remain anonymous. No, I don't really care that much. I'm Kirky, and I go by that. I am here not being held at hostage or gunpoint. Can verify. Pics to confirm for later. Please do not send nudes. I am here to look up information and or jet in as appropriately because, that's what we do.
I like that you said implied at hostage point. Not at, you said at gunpoint, but before that it was at hostage point, which means that someone is holding a hostage to your head.
I mean, that is scary. I mean, blunt force trauma aside, the implications of close contact in a pandemic world are horrifying.
So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like you to think about is a thought experiment that goes back to ancient Greece called the Ship of Theseus. And those of you who don't know, Theseus is kind of the quintessential Athenian hero who went off to Crete and slayed the Minotaur and, did all that happiness. And on his way back to Greece, well, he couldn't hop on a plane, so the only way of traveling over an ocean at the time was a ship. And the legend goes that when he pulled into the harbor of Athens, the ship was preserved and kept in the harbor as, hey, it's our monument to Theseus. Well, as the ship aged, they needed to repair parts of it. So they'd take off damaged parts and then they'd replace it with brand new parts. And eventually, after hundreds of years, there wasn't a single part left from the original Ship of Theseus. So the question is it still the Ship of Theseus? If none of its original parts are still there. And if it is still the Ship of Theseus, what makes it the Ship of Theseus if none of the original parts are there? If it's no longer the Ship of Theseus, at what point did it stop being the Ship of Theseus?
And then what is it now? That's an important question.
I suppose, what is it now? Is it just a pile of wood that's shaped like a boat?
Well, no, but because if that were true, then every ship that's what every other ship is.
Yes, but this is the Ship of Theseus.
No, we don't know that. That's what we're trying to determine.
See, I would argue that the whole premise itself is just a giant allegory for meaning. And does anything have value if it's not assigned to it, right? So there's like the physical value of something, an actual object, symbolism behind that. And then there's emotional, psychological value. And I think that's what this allegory touches on.
Well, there's a common thread there, which is the idea, like you said, the idea of meaning. But what's important about that is that there's only one creature on this planet, or in the known universe, that can assign that sort of thing, and that's us.
Right.
So if we're talking about meaning, we're the only things we know of that can subscribe meaning to objects or ourselves or other people. So there's the idea of the Ship of Theseus, which is, so the ship itself is an object, right? Mm-hmm. It can't self-identify. It doesn't have the capacity for something like that. We assign that to it.
Right.
I want to, because another thing we have to consider is that it's not the same thing. Like, meaning is not the exact same thing as identity. It's not interchangeable, because there are other animals that assign identity, or at least recognize identity. Maybe assign identity is better, but so I guess an example of that would be how animals can tell each other apart, right? Like, I mean, dogs, it's primarily by smell, and as it is with a lot of other animals. So there is still some method for identifying or differentiating one dog from another among dogs. Mm-hmm. But there's no... And even then, I was going to say there's no value assigned to that, but there actually is. It may not be conscious, but there's a value assigned to that, because if they like that other dog, if they're familiar with that other dog, then they behave differently than if it's a strange dog. Mm-hmm. So that's one... I guess we could start with that. Like, there's the physical the physical attributes, and I would say that's also the sensuous attributes of whatever it is that we're trying to identify. So there's that aspect of it. Like with the Ship of Theseus, we're talking about taking all of its physical parts away, or replacing all of its physical parts. So it wouldn't be the same type of identity as a dog identifying another dog. It's not the physical attributes of the Ship of Theseus that make it the Ship of Theseus. And these things can change. Like, identity isn't one specific thing. It can change depending on what type of identity you're dealing with.
Right.
We're not going to get that complex until we start talking about people.
Well, that's the other part of the Ship of Theseus thought experiment. It's really not about the ship.
Yeah.
It's about us. It's about you with a big yeah.
Right. Because the ship isn't able to, like you said, self-identify or even have any characteristics that would give itself the higher executive functioning to be a human or any kind of labeling of such. So, I guess, yeah, the meaning is a huge aspect of it. Like, what does anything have real meaning unless we assign it to it?
Yeah. The other thing that I think is particularly apt about the Ship of Theseus when it comes to talking about the identity of people is, just like the Ship of Theseus has all its parts replaced throughout time, so do we. Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't like each cell in the human body, it's none of them are actually older than about 20 years?
That I don't
That
know.
is not true.
Okay.
It depends if you're talking about germine cells versus somatic cells. And germine cells you're born with and will pass on from you to your offspring. So those are like our sex cells, our chromosomes that are
Nice.
our essential DNA stuff.
So those don't regenerate or change or die,
No.
so those are just there for your entire life.
Now they can be altered by exposure to things like radiation, nuclear waste, things of that nature. Not
Anime.
saying that
Sexzilla!
not to suggest that we are going to suddenly become some crazy sex machine through nuclear radiation
Well,
exposure.
maybe you're not.
Well, I know. I Marvel, if you're listening, I own the rights to that superhero and or heroine.
In the state of Indiana, that does function as a copyright.
But
Crap,
yeah,
now they know
but
what
yes,
state we're in.
your germine cells, your sex cells, stay with you. You're born with them, and they stay with you until you die, or they stop. Like for women, for if your eggs, like your last egg has been released, if you will, or men for when you stop producing sperm. But your somatic cells, those like your skin cells and hair, are replaced quite frequently, assuming you don't have a pre-existing chronic condition or autoimmune suppressive.
We're talking about
condition.
baseline human here.
Right. But like, and then neural cells is a whole other thing. Those, once they're gone, and it takes a lot of energy and power to create. They don't regenerate; they're created anew, and that takes a lot of time. So nothing is like regenerative. But yes, to go back to what you're saying,
But our
No.
somatic cells replace themselves, more or less.
sort of.
We never go totally to point zero. We never run out of somatic cells, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Until multi-system organ failure set in.
No. So that's actually the those first cells you were talking about, them
Germines.
germine cells. That's a big deal when we're talking, at least to some extent, about identity, because what you were getting at, I imagine, was that by a certain time we are not constituted of any of the same things that we were
Right.
theoretically.
That was
20
my
years ago.
understanding anyway. Thank you.
But that's actually really interesting. So that's not true.
From
We
a
actually
microscopic level, yeah.
we actually do have things that stay in our body and remain essentially unchanged our entire lives, barring radiation, apparently. and
Or
menopause,
cancer. Like, yeah, which goes without saying. Right.
All right.
It's interesting, for
Can it
sure.
survive exposure to, like, years of drunkenness? I need to know.
No.
Asking
I've
for a
seen
friend.
I've seen at a bedside standpoint for the listening viewers and or earers at home. I don't know, what's a quick-
Listeners?
Yeah, I know, but earers is funnier to me. Anyway, auditors? Sure.
Orbitons.
There you go. I practice at the bedside as a registered nurse, so I know what I'm talking about. No. answering for your friend. No, you cannot repeatedly abuse your liver and live to tell the tale.
I know I can't. Will it change my sperm? That's all I want to know.
I mean, if you get
Drinking?
cancer and it metastasize, possibly.
Ooh.
But
I got that to
usually,
look forward to.
liver cancer doesn't metastasize to sex organs. If anything, it'd be the other way around. Usually,
I'll be the first then.
oh dear.
Boris Yeltsin was still Boris Yeltsin when he died.
As far as we know, we're trying to establish that right now.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we were talking. What,
Go ahead.
I was going to say so as far as the physical attributes of what identity is, because that's a part of identity is the physical attributes.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the simple stuff. How about the people stuff, the complex shit?
Well, from what I understand, at least according to what I've heard of or from Dr. Peterson, it's identity in and of itself. When you're talking about you with a capital Y, is a negotiation between the self and society around you. Society can't tell you exactly who you are, and you can't really tell you exactly who you are. So there's a...
You think, but you don't.
There's a give and take on that one.
We could go back to René Descartes' biggest contribution to philosophy of the I think, therefore I am. Like, what makes us able to attach identity and even meaning to anything is because we have the high executive functioning of our prefrontal cortex to do so. So, I mean, can animal, you're right, they can distinguish between one creature to another, but do they have a purpose? Do they have a sense of self? And then you could say, maybe no, except for survival. Maybe it's the human connection there that makes our identity different.
We're still a little fuzzy on certain animals as far as being able to self-identify, because some animals seem to have some rudimentary concept of that. I believe elephants are one of them.
Yes.
I don't think chimps are there
Crows.
yet. Crows, I think, is another one.
Orca whales.
Orca whales?
Yeah, they'll assign meaning to other things. I think she was designated like J25. She gave birth to an orca calf. The orca calf died, and she just carried it for 1,000 miles, not letting it sink to the bottom, not letting her offspring sink to the ocean floor. Right. From a survival standpoint, there is no reason to do that. So they assigned a meaning to their offspring, and I mean, I'd call that mourning, if nothing else. So.
Is that really meaning, though? Because that level of meaning could be...
Well, you don't mourn something you lose if it has no meaning to you.
I guess the question then would be, is mourning something... Is mourning something... what's the right word? Instinctual in certain animals. Because that's the problem that you run into, is are we talking about some sort of instinct, or are we talking about... willful cognitive understanding that you're doing something.
To my knowledge, we've never recorded that in any other instance of an orchid infant death. But I'm not a cetaceanologist, marine biologist. I don't know.
Ologist. Just an ologist in general.
An ologist. One who studies ology.
The Descartes thing's an interesting one.
Renal Descartes.
Because, to the best of my knowledge, Descartes wasn't really referencing so much the physical attributes, like the brain being the thing that creates thought. Like what seems to me that Descartes was talking about was more the mind than the brain or anything physical.
Yeah.
Right, he was talking about his ability to process
The
things
fact
in his
of
brain, like
right.
his higher, like
He
his
could
higher
think.
function.
the fact of
Right.
thought.
Correct.
That is the one thing that he recognized as being able to,
As
at
being
least
true.
within himself, within its own framework, be able to verify that there is something happening.
Correct.
Right, there is some kind of experience happening, regardless of anything else that you might assign to that.
Well, that really dips more into authenticity than identity, I'd say, because it was Descartes. It was really, he came down to two things. One, he thinks, therefore he is. He cannot deny in any situation that he is, or he cannot assert in any situation that he is not. That's really what that means. from my reading of it. And then the second one was that God exists. I don't know how he proved that, at least to himself, but those were the two things that he came down to.
Yeah.
And
even that thing, I think, therefore I am thing, that's been discussed obviously quite a bit over the last several hundred years, but there was a group of philosophers, we maybe not want to get too deep into this because it's getting away from the topic of meaning for the most part.
identity.
But not really.
No,
But identity, rather.
I feel like this is a Jerry. Jerry! This is a very in-depth, words are hard. It is a very broad and yet in-depth topic that it does touch on multiple aspects of these things. I would argue we're not getting off topic. Arguably, ironically, I'm getting off topic by pointing that we are not getting off topic. Continue.
Well, I guess we're trying to get to the bottom that we can build up from it, right? I guess maybe that's what we're doing. So yeah, there were philosophers that came along in the mid 20th century, actually right around World War II. They were the phenomenologists with Husserl, Heidegger, and then Sartre and de Beauvoir, and then there were a few other ones. They took issue with that particular claim of Descartes, the whole "I think, therefore I am" thing. And what it boiled down to was, let's see if I can remember the exact line. It's essence. Yeah, fact check this for me real quick. Essence precedes existence. Type that in and see if that's right. Because that would have been the Descartes view. Essence precedes existence. I believe...
I think you are correct. I'm on Stanford's website right now looking over René Descartes' metaphysics.
Renal Descartes.
Yeah, his would have been essence precedes existence, and the phenomenologist would have said existence precedes essence.
I'm into the essential nature, so I think you are correct. That sounds correct. Not that my intuition, knock on wood, this is very punny, is off, but he was a naturalist in that, the things that you were experiencing organically, naturally, must exist because of something making it so. Like, you don't just think because you're told to or whatever. There is something that is driving the body to do so, driving the mind to do so. I might be oversimplifying.
There's that sounds like you're talking about some
teleological argument almost.
Yeah, there's an instinct that's driving it, and I don't know how he connects that to.
What did you say? Presence precedes existence.
Essence precedes existence, I
Okay.
believe, is the Descartes argument, and then the opposite of that, starting with Husserl, I believe, would have been essentially the opposite of that. That existence precedes essence. Like, you have to exist before there can be a mind. There's an existence. There is a version of you before there is the mind version of you.
Actually, what you're tapping into is existentialism.
Well, yeah, it's a branch of existentialism.
Right.
Yeah,
it was
phenomenology is
not
the subset.
stated by René Descartes, actually, but rather Jean-Paul
Sartre.
Sartre.
Yeah.
Sartre.
Sartre explains that the basic principle of existentialism is that existence precedes essence. Existence precedes essence only for human beings.
See, well, only for human beings. I don't remember. That's a weird statement to make. You'd think that if there were any exception to that rule, it would be humans. But I don't know if. Well, Sartre is a philosopher, but I'm not sure I would agree that that's an existentialist presupposition and phenomenologist presupposition. Yeah. But okay.
I'm reading.
But I mean, what we're getting at is the thing we're trying to figure out which thing comes first so we can decide how we're assigned meaning. So if existence precedes essence, then meaning is... I would imagine that there's an argument that there is some innate state of identity, right? So those would be, I guess, the physical things, your actual makeup in the physical world, the things that...
Matter.
Yeah, matter. Matter, scientific matter. Not matter as things matter. Just for clarity's sake.
Here's his synopsis of that point. Existence precedes essence also means that every human being is solely responsible for their actions because we choose who we are. Humans are born as nothing, in his words, and then become who they are through their choices and actions.
Yeah, so there's your essence is developed over time. So I guess maybe to simplify that, you develop your identity over time, and that identity is the same thing. Is synonymous with some. For Sartre, it would have been a secular idea of a spirit.
He also goes on to say that there is no basis for making these choices. We just have to make them. So it's like a drive. I think I was kind of right. It was an inherent drive. I was wrong about who said it, but
Yeah, he had they had this idea called facticity, and what that was facticities were the things in your experience of life that you didn't have control over. Like these are the things that you had, but you still have to deal with them.
right.
To decide, you still have made a choice.
Yeah.
Humans do not have a set purpose because we spend our lives creating who we want to be. We create who we are through our choices and actions. Humans are nothing more or less than what they make themselves to be.
Well, and here's another thing with Sartre, and I think a lot of the phenomenologists, is that they sort of equate identity with being. Because what Sartre's really talking about there is being. I'm not sure I would say that he's necessarily talking about identity unless you think that those two are
Interchangeable.
and I don't believe that they are.
I
think there are multiple. Identity is a multivariate concept.
Just by using his own assertion there, what choices you make are going to be influenced by the physical and social world around you. So it's not simply that you are choosing who you are. It's a whole interaction.
Yeah.
That is.
This is a very much in a vacuum view of humanity.
Humanity in a vacuum doesn't last long.
Right. Because it does not
get oxygen.
It does not entail anything about like you said, like familial influences, genetics, psychological events that may or may not happen to you. Major flash bulb memories, things that can happen to a society. Like 9/11 is a good example for that. It's very generic. Granted, it was written in 1945. That being said, going back to what you said about identity.
Who's you?
Garrett.
Okay, thank
Sorry.
you.
For the people at home.
For the people at home, for the orers out there. Orers, ears. I'm just going to keep changing words.
That's fine.
For all the oralists
we're talking about
out there.
identity right now. There are no hard and fast rules. So.
I lost my train of thought. What were you saying about identity and the person?
And that how it's an ongoing negotiation between you and outside factors.
I'd say that's one. I'd say that's one.
Oh, now I remember.
One level of because there are levels of analysis here, right? I mean, you've got the physical attributes of a person that are part of their identity. Then you also have the social attributes, the things that they like, their interaction with the environment around them, the things that they do, how they dress, so that other people see what like that image that they have of themselves. So there's the interpersonal level of identity, and then you've got maybe I'm not in any particular order of depth here, I guess. You've got what would you call it? Maybe just the personal or maybe cognitive layer of analysis of identity, which is the things that the person attributes to themselves outside of necessarily what they present to the world. Like, it's the things about you inside of you. Like, when you have an identity crisis, those are the things that you're losing.
Right.
You're not losing as much of... Well, when you're having an identity crisis, if you're losing the things, the interpersonal layer, like the way that you dress, the way that other people see you, the way that you see other people... If you're losing those, it's a consequence of losing the personal identity first. Not being able to no longer being convinced by the things that you once thought were the deepest parts of you.
See, I kind of suffered a bit of an identity crisis. In late 2010, I had been something for 4 years, and then suddenly I'm not that thing anymore. So I had to really try and, I had absorbed and internalized this one part of my identity to such an extent by, outside factors, because I had to, and then suddenly I'm not that anymore. Well, what the hell am I?
Well, it was a title that you lost, right?
No, it wasn't just a title.
Well, there's a lot that goes with the title, but
It
that's
was-
sort of the macro level of it.
It was the way of life. It was, the part of it is, well,
It was a reprogramming.
I'm not that thing anymore, and people are going to treat me differently because of that. And I'm going to treat myself differently because of that. Like, I don't have to wake up and shave every day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to do that, and it's been so ingrained that it was scary to not shave. If that makes any sense. At any moment, I expected someone to burst into my room at 5 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing? Get up and shave. So,
What did you...
I think speaking of identity crisis, I really think, I don't know of anyone who has had an identity crisis because of something they've gained. It's always been something that they've lost, as far as I'm aware.
The reason I'm making that face that the audience can't see is because I'm trying to decide whether or not having derealization is a gain. I feel like that was something I gained, but it wasn't good. And as a
Maybe
result
rather you're not personally gaining anything, but rather life is gaining on you. Like the things that have evolved in your or unfolded in your life, it continues to build. It is a continuous momentum. And then it seems to me that identity crises happen when maybe you're not getting anything for your identity, but life around you is building up. Like, it's this, then this, then this, then this. It's like the things in your life are adding, but your identity is therefore in crisis or retracting as a response to your environment.
I would say that barring a psychosis-related identity crisis, it seems to me that the more broad types of identity crisis have to do with the expectations that you had for yourself and of life, your relationship to life, versus how that's actually playing out.
Right.
That seems to be the core of it. It's like, you can handle a certain amount of chaos, but once you get to a certain point, it's too much. Like,
Right.
the weight of that is too much, and then you start wondering, you're mired in trying to sort those things out so much that you're overwhelmed by it. The chaos is too much, and you at that point start questioning. Well, you start thinking that you failed at the thing at trying to achieve whatever goal it was that you were after, even if it wasn't a goal that you consciously had.
Right.
You just know that something isn't right.
Right. When your perceived reality and actual reality collide. Like what?
When they contrast too much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What I was going to say that I thought of earlier about identity is that goes against completely existentialism and it just being something you have to do, is I would give you the argument of Phineas Gage. And for the viewers, listeners at home who do not know
I'm familiar with Phineas
this
Gage.
Real life event, Phineas Gage was a man, I believe, who worked in factory work and
Railroad.
Thank you, railroad. And one day something happened at work. I can't remember what.
Railroad spike.
I know what happened, but I don't know how it happened. A railroad spike went through the left lower base of his skull through and then out and exited out the right frontal temporal aspect of his brain for the sciencey people out there. He survived, but notably with a different personality, a different demeanor, different language. Almost everything about what made Phineas was gone. He was still essentially him, the ship, if you will, but it wasn't him. So I would argue that identity is knowing who you are. And I know it sounds very vague, but hear me out. Like, when you hear about a story about, like on Dateline, a great example, because they talk about this stuff all the time. When someone goes missing because someone murdered them, unfortunately, and then the spouse or whoever is the murder suspect pretends to be them or says they did this, and the family or the people closest to them say that's just not who they are. That's just not what they do. There's no like real way we can physically like grab onto what it is, but we just know, like, I know how Dave talks. I know that if he sent me a text that said, hello, fellow human, how art thou? I'd be like, okay, obviously Garrett has hijacked his phone or somebody, because that is not how.
Why is it me?
Note to self.
You know what I mean? It is the way that makes you you. It's an intertwining of things. It's your language, your vernacular, your inflections, your emotional attachment or detachment. Thank you, from things. It is your clothing, your
things
likes,
all
your
come together
dislikes.
to
They all
create
come
your
together to
essence.
create your identity. They're not like one certain thing, right? It's not one definitive attribute. It is a combination of all those things.
With humans, that's a really important point to make, and I was trying to get there too.
Thank you. Yes, with humans, and you are correct that there is some sorts of consciousness with animals and certain species, but we'll get back to that.
Right. Well, I think the important thing to note there, and you touched on it quite a bit, is that I was talking about the different levels of analysis of what identity is, and I think what we can probably say, especially with that, the Phineas Gage story, is that as long as you retain some amount of your identity in some of those levels, at least one of those levels of analysis, then there is still an element of you there.
Right.
So even if the spike goes through your brain and you personally no longer identify with the person that you once were, the people around you still have that interpersonal identity that is associated with you. So
Sure.
you are still Phineas Gage, you are just Phineas Gage with a different personality. You are Phineas Gage who thinks Phineas is someone else.
So is the ship the ship?
The ship is still the ship because that's a different, in my opinion anyway, I think the ship is still the ship because the ship is an inanimate object, so we assigned it the meaning.
Right.
As long as we still assign it that meaning and that meaning still functions as we assigned it,
Right.
it's still that thing.
It's a tailored ship. A remodeled ship, but it is still the ship.
Okay, so there's another scenario with the Ship of Theseus. And it kind of plays with that, we assign it the meaning, so whichever one we say is the Ship of Theseus, it is the Ship of Theseus. What if there's two ships?
Is this like fucking Schrodinger's cat?
No.
Are we allowed to swear in this podcast?
Yeah, I think so, but Garrett's
Yay!
not sure.
I'd like to
Sorry,
keep it to a
spoiler!
minimum.
F-bombs away!
Pilot bombardier, pilot bombardier. Anyway,
Obama.
Oh,
Obama.
wait.
so let's say that the ship lasts. The Ship of Theseus is made up of 300 planks. I know we know it has sails and oars and all that, but for the sake of this, let's say the entire Ship of Theseus has 300 planks. And each year they decide to not just replace the plank, but take the old plank and make a new ship in the exact same place with the original planks.
So they're just disassembling it and reassembling it?
Yes, but keeping the original ones intact, just using new parts. So...
Cloning?
Keeping the original one intact, but using new parts. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so... year zero, there is no second ship being built out of the original planks of the Ship of Theseus. Year one, they take one plank off the Ship of Theseus and put it into a, in any space that it would be if it were on a ship, right?
Yeah.
So let's say it's a keel board, and they lay that down and then put a new keel board on the Ship of Theseus. I think we can all agree that removing one plank from the Ship of Theseus doesn't say it's not no longer the Ship of Theseus.
I don't know, man. That was a meaning-bearing plank.
But as the years go on, year two, there's now two planks from the original Ship of Theseus in the new construction, and a second new plank on the original Ship of Theseus.
But we're still okay. But these parts that we're taking from it, are they going to build the same ship or each?
Yes, exact same ship.
Okay.
As far as layout, everything.
Okay. But it's only one other ship, right?
Right.
Okay. That's
So,
what I wanna make sure.
you're not
It's not
taking-
being cannibalized and sent parts out to
it's-
different ships. It's
You are one for one part transfer over to this new construction.
okay.
So, as things are being taken off the old Ship of Theseus, it's being moved to what may be the new Ship of Theseus, depending on how you define these things. Then, at the end of 300 years, which one is the Ship of Theseus? Because both have a decent claim, depending on how you look at it.
Well, clearly one is the Ship of Theseus and the other one is Son of Theseus.
Well, which one is the son of Theseus then?
The one that they made, they took the parts and made the new ship. The new ship. It's still the new ship because the Ship of Theseus that they took those parts from came first. There's a chronology there, and that is, I would say chronology definitely has a part of identity. There's actually a part in that article that I was talking about. Identity over time.
At what point did the Ship of Theseus become the Ship of Theseus, and the Ship of Theseus become the son of the Ship of Theseus?
Well, the Ship of Theseus, the son of the ship, the son of Theseus, we'll just simplify.
The son of Theseus.
The son of Theseus, that ship became the son of Theseus the moment they started building it out of the parts of Theseus. The very first plank.
So, when it comes to speaking to identity, if you lose one piece of the original construction, then it is no longer that thing.
No, it's still that thing.
Well, you just said that they took one piece off of it, and it's now the son of the Ship of Theseus.
No, the new ship is the son of Theseus.
Okay, well, it's now made of all the original parts. It has just as good of a claim.
No, it doesn't, because chronologically it came second. Identity over time, that's another part of the identity argument.
Okay. So...
I would argue it's not. The son of Theseus is not the Ship of Theseus.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I concur.
So the one that's made of all the original parts at the end of 300 years is not the Ship of Theseus, is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
No, the original ship is still the Ship of Theseus.
And that started from year one, when the first plank was removed.
Yes. The moment the first plank was removed, and let's get really, really pedantic here. The removing of that plank did not begin the start of the son of Theseus. What began the start of the son of Theseus was laying that plank down and identifying it as this is going to be the new ship. That was the beginning of the son of Theseus. Because they could have taken that plank off and set it off to the side and been baked in the sun for a while or something. That plank is not the son of Theseus. It's not the son of Theseus until they make the decision, because humans are the meaning makers. They're the ones who assign meaning. They didn't become the son of Theseus until they decided to take that plank and build another ship out of it. Okay,
so if I build a mannequin and take your right arm off and decide to throw that on the mannequin and call this the son of Dave, this is now the son of Dave.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
I'll accept that. I'll raise it like it was my own.
For however long.
There may be some resentment there. But only for the short time it would take for my arm to rot off of the mannequin. Yeah, okay. Next.
Okay.
You want to? Is there a counter argument that you can think of for that one?
I can't remember the counter argument, but it was a good one.
Oh well. I guess I lose then.
It basically comes down to what is more important. Which claim is better, in your personal opinion?
I still think the former claim we made that the identity of something is the.
Okay, that's the counter argument. The parts don't matter, is what you're saying.
When we're talking about.
And remember, the
objects,
Ship of Theseus is
utility. We need to talk about utility. We should take a break then. Okay, well...
we'll get back to utility after this commercial break.
This episode brought to you by Story Porpoise, the Cetacean Translation Foundation. Through painstaking effort and tireless research, we have translated Das Kapital, Conditions of the Working Class in England, and the Communist Manifesto for our Cetacean comrades.
And we're back! Okay, so I think we were going to dive into utility, and the reason I say that is because we're talking about how, with the Ship of Theseus in particular, we're talking about how people assign identity, and when it comes to assigning identity, I think it actually could be considered. You can make an argument that identity is interchangeable with meaning when it comes to how humans assign identity to things. Like the Ship of Theseus. So, what's a good segue into that?
Well, what do you mean by utility in regards to identity? Because I know utility as far as utilitarianism, that kind of thing, but
We tend to look at the world in terms of meaning before we look at it in terms of objects.
okay.
Right. So when we look at, without getting into Heidegger here, when we look at a hammer, we're looking at a thing that does something. Right? That's how we identify a hammer.
Its purpose.
Yeah. We identify
So-
things through purpose, which is basically meaning, as far as humans are concerned. Teleological?
Teleological.
French.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, wow.
You'd like to buy a hamburger?
Hamburger.
And that latest sidetrack was brought to you by ADD.
Yep. I am sufficiently derailed. Yeah, so.
Yeah,
French.
I get where utility as far as objects goes. You look at a hammer, and this has a purpose. It was built. It has a purpose. Someone built it for a reason. I think that's what separates tools from art, for instance. I mean, art has a purpose, but it's kind of subjective in most cases.
Kind of. That's the whole point. Is it?
Well, that in and of
whole
itself is a
other
subjective
podcast.
statement.
Okay.
That is an entirely different podcast. As an illustrator,
Okay.
But you look at a hammer, and this is meant to hit things. Nice heavy head to it, flat area. Depending on the type of hammer, it might be a ball peen.
So
But-
many that's what she said jokes.
well, hell, maybe
Bam.
we do get into Heidegger on this one.
Heidegger.
So,
But when it comes to like personal identity, I don't. I can't wrap my head on how utility factors into personal identity.
we're not talking about
Except it's
personal
part-
identity right now.
Okay.
We're jumping back a little bit to go dive into object identity, I guess.
Okay.
I want to make sure that this is relevant because we're jumping into Heidegger on the hammer thing. He had a story, I guess not really a story, but an example that he used with a hammer, where he called them things at hand. I believe you can fact check that for me. Heidegger things at hand, because he had this idea of things at hand, and then there was the opposite of that. Yeah, look that up.
Hands at things.
No. What it had to do with was actually Peterson has talked about this same idea a little bit, but he uses computers.
Okay.
Like he doesn't, when he's using a computer, he's not thinking about the computer as a computer and all of the things that it is. The only time he starts thinking about that is when it breaks. And then it presents itself to him as this thing that he now has to deal with and understand at a level that he's never had to do that before.
Is Heidegger a physicist?
No, he was a philosopher.
What was his first name?
Martin.
Martin Heidegger.
How do you spell Heidegger?
Heidegger. Heidegger.
Why is spelling so hard?
Well, he was German.
I know. Ah,
I think he was Freiburgian. I could be wrong about
Heidegger.
that. Who Searle was.
Heidegger. Sounds
Heidegger.
a lot like a German version of hamburger.
Oh no, the French didn't like Heidegger. He was a Nazi
Oh, he was.
for a while.
Are we really going to talk about a Nazi?
Well, he was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, regardless of his stint as a Nazi. So, yeah.
I don't feel comfortable backing him on that.
Well,
You
the
know what I
fact of
mean.
being a Nazi does not affect his ability to extrapolate things realistically in other areas of life.
As long as you're Aryan.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yes.
I'm just saying. Okay, what is this thing I'm supposed to be?
Heidegger, things at hand. I think that's probably the easiest way to...
Gotcha.
Or Heidegger hammer, Heidegger things at hand. It's going to bring up the same little story, I
Blurb.
suppose, yeah.
Use the present at hand.
Present at hand. there we
Or
go.
the Vorhandenheit. And the ready to hand, which is the Zuhandenheit.
Yes. If you've got a little blurb there, feel free to read that.
Present at hand refers to our theoretical apprehension of a world made up of objects. It is the concept of the world from which science begins.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's thinking of the world in terms of objects. Right.
Okay.
I was at there.
And then ready at
kicked
hand.
me out. I am a...
So ready at hand is
person.
thinking in ways of purpose?
I would say to a certain extent, yeah.
So
Like
the
it's-
object itself and then the purpose it has.
The ready to hand describes our practical relation to things that are handy or useful.
Yes.
Heidegger's basic claim is that practice precedes theory and that the ready to hand is prior to the present at hand.
Yeah.
The problem with most philosophy after Descartes is that it conceives of the world theoretically and thus imagines, like Descartes, that I can doubt the existence of the external world and even the reality of the persons that fill it. Who knows, they might be robots. For Heidegger, by contrast, who we are as human beings is inextricably bound up and bound together with the complex web of social practices that make up my world.
Yeah, that's the phenomenologist in Heidegger. It's putting the importance on experience and not on
Theory.
theory. I guess on I guess we can use theory. I don't really like that word as much though. I guess it is theory though. It's the thinking of the world in terms of the meaning that you apply to it using your mind. It's not a really good way to describe that, but
Auf Deutsch.
yes. Yeah, it's maybe thinking of the world in terms of meaning rather than of objects. Maybe that's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
Right.
So you were going somewhere with this earlier with utilitarian or the utility.
Yeah, it has to do with how humans assign identity based on utility to things before they assign them based on what the object as a thing in itself.
So kind of as an example, a caveman would know, hey, I can hit something with this rock before he recognizes it as gives it a name of his hitting rock.
Right. Right.
Okay.
We assign meaning to things before we assign them physical identity, I guess.
All right. Yeah, I can see that. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's it?
Well, people have been arguing about whether or not that's true for a very long time. Is the rock a rock before we identify it as a rock?
Well,
I
it's
think that's
not
right.
called a rock till we call it one.
But is it still that thing? That's the thing. Like, that's what we're trying to determine. Does it have the identity? Does it have... Okay, we're going to get into Kant on this.
Does
This
it
is
have
where-
purpose before we give it one?
This is where Kant comes in. So you've heard me talk about this, you have the phenomenal universe, and you have the noumenal universe. Right? So the phenomenal universe is the universe of things. Right? That's,
Okay.
It's things existing in physical space. That's the phenomenal world. And the things that have a phenomenal description of something would be a description of it based on its properties, right? So, I think I've used we'll use a hammer since we talked about that. A hammer is made of wood and some type of metal. Usually.
It masses 1 kilo.
Right. It has a particular mass. All those things. That's its phenomenal description. You can only have a phenomenal description if there is a perspective on that thing, though, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be a perspective on it to assign it, or to acknowledge that there are those properties. Right, but if you take that perspective away, whatever is left about that thing, that hammer, that is the hammer as a noumenal entity. So the noumenal hammer is all the things that make the hammer in and of itself. It's the hammer undefined by the perspective of something else.
All right, so tell me if I'm going anywhere with this. We can say that the hammer is made of wood and metal. We can say it masses 1 kilo. We can say it has a flat face on one end and a claw on the other.
Right.
I was going to go with a wedge, but I was thinking blacksmith's hammer, but that's me. So, it has these things. But we take away the descriptors.
And stop looking at it.
and you'd have to stop looking at it. But So you remove the hammer from it.
Stop thinking about it even,
Yeah.
actually.
So if someone were to come at this hammer completely cold...
They can't even do that.
Oh.
Imagine that the hammer is floating somewhere out in space. And
But I
nobody's
can't think about the hammer now.
Well, this is okay. You can still. It's knowable. What is it? It's thinkable, but not knowable. That's what we're getting at here. All right. So you can still think about the hammer being out there and nobody looking at it and not being observed by anything. Whatever
Okay.
that is, whatever the hammer is in that instance, that is the noumenal hammer. Right. That's just whatever. And that's the hard thing because you can't define it because the moment you start defining it, you're getting
Right.
into the phenomenal elements.
All right, I'm failing to see the utility of this now.
See, that's important.
the noumenal hammer.
Is it still a hammer?
No, it's not a hammer anymore.
Why?
Because a hammer is by definition a tool that has a purpose and has these things attached to it. If you remove all that, it's just
So if it loses
at best matter.
if it loses the purpose that it was given when it was created, it loses its identity. Is that what you're saying?
In the case of a hammer, yes.
Okay. So if we create a hammer and then we all die off, there's no humans, there's no animals left, there's nothing observing anything in the world, all the things that we created cease to have their identities.
Except for Thor.
Well, he's a person though, that's a perspective.
And he's got Mjolnir. He's not using a random blacksmith's hammer.
Mew mew. Thank you for the
So
Dr. Darcy Lewis fans out there.
All things lose their identity when there's nothing around to perceive those things.
Well, now we're kind of getting into that. If a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound if no one's around to hear it, kind of thing. I mean,
It's
you're
not the
taking
exact
away
same
all possible observers. So,
I had a feeling this is where Garrett and I would start to disagree.
Uh-huh.
Because Garrett has a tendency to anthropomorphize the existence of
no,
meaning.
anthropocentrize. Not
Well, yeah, sorry, you're right. Anthropocentrize.
Get it right, Dave.
Yeah,
You're
well.
going to sling me.
First of all, it's Cretan.
Well, the argument is do the things that we attribute meaning to the physics, to the laws that we give and define things as still exist if humans aren't around to perceive them.
Are we the only thing that can offer
Right.
things identity?
Right.
Well,
Not even
like-
humans. I would say that's too anthropocentric. Anything that has the capability of perceiving.
So animals.
If you eradicate anything that has the capability of perception,
Okay.
or does that mean that all of the things that are left lose their identity? Do they stop being whatever they are in any sense of the?
But at that point, it doesn't matter. Is where
Because we're not around.
So we've entered nihilism. Nothing has meaning. Everything is pointless. The end.
That's not exactly
I
nihilism.
mean, if everything that can perceive,
Part
which
of
means
it.
you're talking about a universe of dead matter. That's what's left.
A black hole.
Not necessarily. Now we get into trees and plants and shit. Would you
Well,
say that a
okay.
tree can perceive in any way?
Yes.
I mean, a tree has,
A
There's
tree
an
can
argument for
tree
that.
has
perceive.
receptors, yeah.
One of the quintessential aspects of life is it responds to stimulus. It has to be able to perceive the stimulus to respond to it. So taking away anything that can perceive anything, I mean, you're left with dead matter.
Okay, well let me ask you this then. Let's say that does happen. There's no creatures left in the universe capable of perceiving the universe.
Right.
There's nothing. There's no organism capable of perceiving the universe. But you've still got rocks on Mars, right?
No.
So everything ceases to exist.
Without
I mean,
the influence
That's the
of
question.
human.
Does it cease to exist?
Well, you can't have rocks in a noumenal universe because by giving it a name, it now has a phenomenal
No, it would just be nameless. It would still be there. It just
Wait a
it would
minute,
just
wait
be
a minute, wait a
nameless.
Well, then we
Are you-
can't call them rocks anymore.
Wait, are you saying that
Well,
everything
again,
that
it's
happened
thinkable but not
before
knowable.
humans existed didn't really happen because humans didn't exist to interpret it happening?
That's what we're trying to get at here. It's like
Well, that's just bullshit.
No, I'm not saying humans. I mean,
well, anything that
something.
can perceive it.
Right, so the next time a golden retriever records something, I'll let you know. Don't
Do-
have to say.
Do things still happen even though there's nothing? There's nothing perceiving those things happening.
Okay, that's a different question.
No, it's basically the same question.
Our producer is pestering Dave.
Yes. Wrap it up. Wrap it up. I got shit in a box. I'm not stopping you from shitting in a box.
If something's happening and there is literally nothing to observe it, nothing to perceive it, then it really only takes on meaning if something comes about later.
I'm not talking about meaning.
We can then record what happened, and then all right, then there's utility to it.
I'm not talking about meaning. I'm just asking, do those things still happen even though there's nothing
Sure.
perceiving them? Okay. Okay, so
But
That
in
was
order
what the
to,
you don't need
argument is.
perception in order for things to happen.
yes,
Events still occur even if there's nothing,
Even if there are no witnesses.
even if there were, yeah, well, that's made.
okay,
good way
yeah,
to put it. Okay, so those things that are happening, are those things still things? Those events that are happening, are they still events? Because if you're going to say that they happen, you have to acknowledge them as events. Again, this is
well,
you can think of they're thinkable but not knowable. That's the difference here.
are the events still events?
Yes.
Only after someone can come along and say they are.
Why?
The age-old question.
Why is that the case? Because you're saying that events are happening even if there's nobody around to perceive them. There are no witnesses to it. So there's still something happening. Events are still happening, which means there is some identity there. It is still a thing in itself. The event is still not, when we're talking about events, it's not a literal thing. It's made up of things doing and taking action. Things in motion, I guess. But there is still, in order for events to happen, there has to be differentiation.
Okay.
Even if it's not a perceptual differentiation. Because events can't happen if everything is the same. An event is an event when one thing differentiates from another.
Okay, so what you're saying is, I'm going, in my head, I'm going, Big Bang, nothing was around then. No, at least nothing possible that we know of could perceive what was going on. We can trace that it happened, but nothing was around to see it. Right?
That's-
Yeah.
Things still occur and things are things without humans.
What I'm getting at, my argument here is that as long as there is differentiation, there is identity.
Okay.
Because you can't have differentiation if there isn't identity. Differentiation defines identity, and you don't need perception for that to be the case.
Well, there has to be something to differentiate them. So the
The things
themselves.
differentiating, yeah, the things themselves are differentiating each other, even though they aren't perceiving their own differentiations.
Okay.
Cool. So what? I mean, that was significant. What we established is that there is still some manner of identity, even when there isn't a human or some other organism, perceiving organism around to witness it.
Okay, so when it comes to at least, non-conscious entities, it has an identity in and of itself, and we just come along and give it a name.
Yeah, we're more or less, in one respect, we're discovering the identity. We're discovering the identity of those types of things, those events, those like matter or events. We're discovering them. We're not creating them. But then there are things that we create that we do because we created them. We created their meanings, which more often than not has to do with utility.
Okay, well, I'll give we create the meaning, because as you said at the beginning of the podcast, we are the only creatures that we know can assign meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the we know part that I think is important in that statement. So only things that we create have meaning, or have meaning. Going off
Theoretically.
Theoretically. Theoretically.
Yeah.
Okay.
See that?
So
we don't
by
need to
that
go.
by that extent, only the things that we create have utility.
Theoretically, we're getting into the weeds on that one, because you could make the argument that reality's constituent parts are meaning and not matter. You could make that argument. It's complicated, but it makes sense.
I'm going to have to take your word for that one.
And you start getting into theology on that. It's almost unavoidable. I haven't been able to find a way to discuss that without getting into theology. Actually, for the reason that we just talked about, where in order to assign meaning, there has to be something to assign it.
Right.
And if reality's constituent parts are meaning, that means there has to be something assigning that meaning
To everything.
to everything. So, I don't know if that's... Do we want to go down that rabbit
I mean,
hole?
all right. I'm kind of trying to process the metaphysical gravel road I was just dragged down. Because we started utility, and then we went into the whole things have identity without meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're saying everything has meaning.
Well, I'm saying there's an argument that the constituent parts of reality are meaning, that things are made up of meaning, and that meaning...
I'm getting the feeling you're just fucking with me now.
I'm not, I promise. That things are made up of meaning before they're made up of matter.
Okay, so we're going back to Descartes then. Essence,
Possibly, yes.
Essence precedes existence.
Yes. Yeah. And that's probably how Descartes believed that... I don't remember this, if this is true or not, but I'd wager that that's probably how Descartes believed that he proved the existence of God.
Yeah, I could see.
And it's a strong argument. It's a very strong argument.
Well, then...
But it's suppositional. I think. I'd have to think about that more.
So, going back to some examples on the... only things that are created have meaning.
Yes, I would say that's a pretty safe...
And only things that have utility... Or only, things that have meaning have utility.
The relationship between meaning and utility. I would say, yeah, a thing only has...
You said theoretically yes earlier. I probably screwed up my wording there.
I would say things only have utility if they've been assigned meaning, and I think in that situation, they're pretty much interchangeable.
So, only things that have utility have meaning, and only things that are created have meaning.
I think that's probably that would be
all
the
right.
case. Because a thing can't have meaning unless there's something to assign that meaning, and humans assign meaning by utility. Most often. Except with other humans and animals.
I don't know.
Sometimes
I think there's a utility argument to be made about people.
Probably. Well, yeah, there's probably a really strong argument there.
I mean, Aristotle...
It comes off as cynical, but...
Aristotle might disagree on that a little bit, but... at least when it comes to friends.
Well, with other humans, there's a big difference. With other humans, you have a chiasmic relationship of meaning, because it's not just you assigning meaning to them.
Stop. Chiasmic.
Chiasmic. So a chiasm is a place where two things intersect. Right? It's the intersection point. And a lot of times it's in, I think philosophically, if I remember right, a chiasmus is something that...
You mean a chiasm?
Sure, I've only ever read it. I've never actually heard it spoken out loud.
CHIASM?
Yeah, there you go.
Chiasm.
Oh, yeah, chiasm, that's how it's pronounced. I've only ever read it. So.
I was like, is this like where two cheeses become one?
Yes, I guess that would be it. So,
Oh my
chiasm.
God.
I actually like that pronunciation better, so we'll go with that.
That's what I would have gone with in the first place.
So do you know what that is
He
then?
says wrong.
No.
Oh,
But seeing how it's spelled in my head, I would have gone.
nah, whatever. You know what? I should have known that because it's derived from a word that starts with K.
Well, it's derived from Greek.
Yeah. And it's KH, something like that.
Chiasm, an intersection of crossing two tracks in the form of the letter X.
I mean, that's the simplest version of that, but it also can have something have to do with something like two things that fold in on each other and that are difficult or impossible to separate, right? So the reason I use that word is that you have it's almost like a circuit of meaning, I guess. When you're dealing with another person in particular, you're assigning meaning to them, but they're also assigning meaning to you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that relationship with... Well, you might have that with other animals. There's an argument for that, I'm sure. But you don't have that relationship with a bottle or a hammer or a cup. Right? That a cup isn't assigning meaning to me. So that's, I think, where it probably differs a little bit. But we're always going to differ when we get into, I guess, the problem of the human. Because it's a lot easier to talk about identity in terms of inanimate objects than it is to talk about it in terms of people.
The problem of a human. What is a man but a miserable pile of secrets? Good enough, have at you.
So.
Yeah,
Well, let's try to remember
so
what the initial question was, right?
I'm trying to combine all this stuff together, right?
So is the ship a ship?
We know it's a ship, but is it the ship?
No, it can't be. By definition.
No, we all agreed that it was.
I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, you explicitly did.
Oh, no, I meant the son of Theseus is not the ship. That's what I agreed.
Oh, yeah, we are.
Yeah, the ship's the ship. But once you start taking it apart and making it something else, it's not the ship anymore.
Oh, that's a different thing than what you said.
Yeah, my bad. The last thing we talked about with the ship was the son of Theseus. That's what I was stuck on. So.
Yeah, but you're forgetting that the Theseus was still there, even when the son of Theseus was being built.
That was what you said.
So when they're
Right.
building the son of Theseus, they're taking parts off of Theseus to build it, but they're replacing those parts on the original.
Right. The son
So
of
is the original
Theseus
still
not...
Theseus?
Well, yeah.
Okay, see, that's
That's
we
what...
agreed to that. We
Yeah.
answered that question.
Sorry, I thought I made that clear. I guess I didn't.
Okay.
But I think we went into why and had a pretty good explanation for that. It's been a while.
I think that might have happened off recording.
We've Heideggered since then.
Heidegger!
We've Kanted since then.
I have made this new... I call it Nazicide. Sorry.
Okay, so what do we have left? What questions do we have left about identity?
Well, I have a lot of questions on... Alright. So,
Rapid fire.
things have an identity without meaning. But we need meaning to establish the identity.
Wrong.
We only
it's
need meaning
kinda-
to establish an
I mean,
identity
that's-
if we have a perspective.
Okay, so things with... If there is no perception of it, it has an identity.
Yeah, because
Without
it's-
meaning.
Because
Right,
it's
you don't
different.
But the
meaning.
moment it is perceived, it has meaning by utility, therefore an identity.
There you go.
There you go.
It's just a different type
Yes.
of identity. It's a new layer of identity, like we were
Correct.
talking about.
Okay,
with
it's a
people.
new layer of identity.
Yeah.
Identity can and does exist without meaning.
I wonder if this is like... it just popped in my head is, those old stories that kind of going into biblical stuff. It's
No.
like, knowing...
Dave grabs the pencil.
Yeah, he's frantically
Writes
writing
tensely.
away.
His
He's
jaw
got
clenched.
his eyes are bugged. I think he's having a stroke.
No, that is Do you know the signs and symptoms of stroke? Thank God I'm.
Yeah, you smell toast all the time.
That is not in any way true. If anything, you might be having a seizure.
It kind of goes to, humans we're known from, well, I don't know if we're known, but we know ourselves to engage in magical thinking.
What do you mean by magical thinking?
Superstitious.
Partly superstitious, but that the magical thinking of you apply for, or you enter into a lottery, thinking, well, someone's got to win it, might as well be me, which puts that like, well, it's gonna be me. From all other aspects, we know it's not gonna be you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's still a very small chance, but that chance is a lot smaller than you think it is, because humans don't deal with numbers well, at least big numbers well. But that's an example of magical thinking. And when it comes to establishing identity of things without perception,
so
we're talking
magical thinking. Just real quick to simplify that, magical thinking would be belief without sufficient evidence.
That's one example.
Okay.
Magical thinking.
Talking about
magical thinking is another
like
podcast entirely.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to clarify what that is.
That is a way to arrive at magical thinking.
Okay.
But
for all the earballs out there, clarification.
Earballs. That's a good one. I like that.
In order to have an identity without meaning, that would have to be a pretty primordial thing.
No, it's not. Okay, look. This is a can for the earballs out there of Diet Coke.
Right.
Does this can have meaning? Not really, until I assign it a meaning. It is simply an object. It is the human's cognitive higher executive functioning of the frontal lobe, specifically the prefrontal lobe, that gives it meaning inherent for that person. Things that have meaning that we assign to them. If we do not assign meaning to it, it's still an object. It still exists. It's still right there.
All of that is true, but that is a bad example. Because the can was created.
But it still exists.
Yeah, but it was created so it had meaning from the moment that it...
I'm just
saying... From the moment it was conceived of.
In this actual real room, there are objects, whether they were created or not, or just inherently exist. Like the things we can't see, like oxygen and nitrogen in the air and hydrogen.
Better example.
Okay.
That existed before man did.
Yeah.
But what I was getting at was, these things that exist without perception, it would have to be fairly primordial, like nitrogen or oxygen. And those old tales of knowing a demon's true name, which existed before anyone else could give it another one. By knowing its true name, you gain power over it. Mm. So that if we could figure out what this thing was before we were around to tell it what it was, we could gain power over it.
That's really interesting.
That's where the magical thinking thing comes across.
That's not necessarily false.
We have no reason to think it's true, though.
Well, we do, to a certain extent. It just depends on what you mean by power. It depends on what type of power you're talking about. Because the moment you can identify something, you have some sort of power over it, because you can conceive of it in different ways than it would permit you to do. So
example, please.
Okay. So let's use a demon as an example, all right?
All right.
Let's say you discover this demon's original name. And so...
Phallic.
The demon's name is Phallic.
No,
Phillik. Phallic.
Valak from The Conjuring 2 for all the horror and scary movie fanatics out there. Thank you for listening to my rant. Continue. It's Valak, not phallic. But that is arguably funny.
We're going with phallic.
Okay, we're going with phallic.
Oh my god.
Okay, so... Kirky, damn it, you derailed me again.
ADD strikes again.
Right, so...
A demon. Sign
A demon named Phallic.
A demon named Phallic, and you
well, first you true name is Phallic.
Right, but you did have a name for this demon prior to that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any access to learning its original name, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had some understanding that there was a demon before you knew what its original name was. So why would that be the case? Why would there be this idea that you could lord some kind of power over a demon if you learned its original name? Why do you think that might be?
I have no idea, but in some way it makes sense. I don't know why,
I think it makes sense because if you think about things in terms of meaning, then what you're doing, if you're, let's see, I want to make this as simple as possible. If reality's constituent parts are meaning, then when you discover, we'll call it the noumenal name of that demon's name in and of itself, then you now have some amount of control over that because then you can manipulate the meaning of it.
Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with that.
I'd say that would be the reason. I would say that would be the symbology of that particular, what would you call that? Superstition or something along those, whatever you would call that.
Right, but that would preclude that its nominal name had meaning in the first place.
Yeah, nominal, not noumenal.
You know.
I was going to let it slide, but...
That would be noumenal.
It's
Noumenal.
The pronunciation of Noumenal?
No, I thought you meant nominal, like name.
No.
No.
Although, I see where you're going with that.
If we're going with the Kantian definition of noumenal, then you have to remove the meaning from it. So, by learning the demon's true name and being able to change its meaning would mean that it had meaning before anyone could give it meaning.
Well, the demon would have given it meaning. If no one else, the demon would have had meaning.
The demon itself would have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's an interesting question.
Just
when something
I feel like now we're
defines
getting
its
into
own...
the psychological part of meaning.
Well, now I'm curious because this is when something defines its own meaning. Is it phenomenal meaning or is it noumenal meaning? Because it's its own. It's still in and of itself. It's still the thing in itself. Does it matter if it's conscious or not?
I think it'd have to be conscious for it to have any kind of...
You can't have meaning without consciousness.
Well, yeah, that's true. So we have a conscious... We'll use the demon because we're already there. So the demon is conscious, and whatever meaning it assigns...
Phallic the buggerer.
Whatever meaning it assigns itself... I'm wondering now, that's probably a whole nother podcast. I don't need to think about that.
Yeah.
I do think we are drifting from the point.
Well,
I thought we were coming back to it with phallic there. I mean, we're talking about a being, a notional being that has identity before any negotiation could happen.
Yeah, before any negotiation over what that...
It's not a conscious being, so of course it can have meaning, right?
Only if it assigns it to itself, assuming that it's the only conscious being perceiving it.
I mean...
Well, to have consciousness is to assign oneself meaning. To give oneself meaning. Or else you can't survive.
No, I think maybe we're mixing up consciousness with sentience.
No, I'm not talking about sentience. I'm talking about... I'm talking about consciousness. So...
Garrett, is that right?
I've got three words bouncing around in my head. Sentience, sapience, and consciousness.
Sapience and sentience remind me of because for some reason I
Okay.
Sentience isn't the right one. That's
Then
not
it would
what
be
I'm going for.
Sentience
Is all-knowing,
is
right?
no, that's
No.
omniscient.
Sorry. My bad.
Sentience is it thinks. Sapience, no,
Is
excuse me.
self-awareness.
Sentience is recognizes itself as separate from the things around it.
Okay.
Sapience is it can think and process.
Okay, so sapience is the word I was looking for. Then I consistently get those mixed up.
And consciousness is we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means.
Okay.
From a
Right. So we probably want to stick with, for the sake of clarity, sentience or sapience when we're trying to differentiate those two things. So yeah.
According to Webster's dictionary, Merriam-Webster, sentience is feeling or sensation is distinguished from perception and thought. So sentience is about feeling and sensing.
Betting there's more than one definition for that.
It also can mean quality or state. That's more vague. I mean, sentient, the adjective, is responsive to or conscious of sense impressions, which I think would also go with feeling, being aware.
Yeah, it's awareness of being separate.
Yeah, it's the ability to differentiate
Something
some
from
idea
something
of
else.
yourself.
Sapience is
From-
wisdom, discernment, if you will.
Yeah.
That's not a bad way to think about it. It's probably a little bit too
Also brought to you
specific.
by
but
Merriam-Webster.
I think that's probably a little bit too specific.
But,
Because
I
we
mean-
all know sapients.
It's on the
Sapient
nose, though.
creatures who are not particularly wise.
Yes. I mean, what, the wisest man in Athens realized he knew nothing?
I mean, and then the consciousness in and of itself, if we go to conscious, is, I feel like, definitely, I wouldn't say a combination, but attributes sentient and sapient to that. So having mental faculties not dulled by sleep, faintness, or stupor. So you can be in a different mental state.
So
and
if something is
be a-
sapient and sentient, it is conscious.
Correct.
Okay, I don't know about that because I think of, my cat as being conscious but not sapient.
I mean, it makes sense though, because sentient is your feeling and awareness of something, right? Sapient is your ability to decipher between things, like
No, sentience would be your ability to identify some idea about yourself.
right.
Some sense of yourself from the things around you.
That's sentience.
Yeah.
That's sentience.
Yeah.
Sapience would be higher order functions. It would be not only being able to make that differentiation, but being able to assign meaning to those differentiations.
Plan, reason.
Plan ahead. That's a big one.
So you're talking about higher executive functioning.
Yes.
Things that separate us from other animals.
Yeah.
Which I've said several times on this podcast.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be one of your favorite phrases tonight.
I do
Higher executive
like
functions.
I do like prefrontal cortex. It's the unspoken cortex of the frontal lobe. Just kidding. It's talked about.
I think it's the most. I was going to say. I think it's the most spoken of.
I mean, I'm a big fan of it, but I gotta say, my hypothalamus, I really like that.
I harbor resentment for my amygdala.
Your amygdala is very.
I want some credit for that. Damn.
Listen, your amygdala. It's funny. Your amygdala is a very important part of your limbic system, which we can get into in a whole other podcast. And
Okay, is there an unimportant part of my limbic system? That's another question that I have.
I mean,
Do I have vestigial limbics?
we could argue that the connection or lack of connection between the frontal lobe and the limbic system can create a whole nother podcast of emotional disorders and whatnot. So yes, you could say part of your limbic system is not important, but it might be your frontal lobe's inability to comprehend what's going on that is the problem. Your ability
Yeah, you
to
can still be
bridge the
having
gap.
like extreme
Right.
emotions. You
Right.
just don't know it.
Yeah,
That's a weird thing.
it reminds me of the... Okay, now there's two things. One phrase that I know it has a technical definition, but always kind of... How do those jive together? Minor, traumatic brain injury. I know what that is. I know it has a technical definition,
Minor
but
traumatic brain
it's
injury.
minor, traumatic brain injury. Those...
I think it probably has to do with the level of detriment.
Yes, there are
And the
other
effect of the-
there are
of the-
worse traumatic brain injuries one can suffer, and they need a grade to distinguish
Because
them.
a bruise is technically traumatic.
Yeah, that's a concussion, minor traumatic brain injury. And then you could be feeling intense emotions but not realize it. It reminded me of the old SNL commercial, because the only thing worse than a migraine is having one and not knowing about it. But there are situations where, I was feeling things, but I didn't realize I was feeling them. I think that's a big part of PTSD, actually.
I could definitely see that.
You're not feeling these things because you need to focus on other shit going on at the time.
Compartmental.
Most often, survival.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and because you weren't able to process it then, your brain's trying to process it later.
I would still argue back to what we were discussing, and I agree with you about sapient, is that it's more of a higher executive functioning, that consciousness is sentience and
Sapiens
sagacity, if you will.
Sagacity.
Now we're bringing another word in.
Well, when you look up
$10 word.
sapiens, it says wisdom, sagacity. And when you look up sagacity, it says a degree of sagacious. And then sagacious gives you the meaning that Dave's been alluding to this entire time. It's a rabbit hole of dictionary.
Well, go ahead and rattle off the actual definition of
Sagacious?
sagacious. I'm assuming the root word there is
Sage.
Or saga. It's probably sage. Means of keen and far-sighted penetration and judgment, also known as discerning or discernment.
I mean, I am pretty good at
Sagacious
far-sighted
judge of
penetration.
character. Cast by or
mean-
indicating acute discernment. Keen in sense perception.
Say how you will, but the question is, does it
So,
work?
sentience, I still stand with, is the ability to feel and perceive something. Like, this is making a sound. And then sagacity, is being able to understand why it's making a sound. And consciousness is understanding, like, what is all happening around me and how I'm connected to my reality. In a sense.
Most of that I feel like is right. I'm still just not. I still disagree with what consciousness is. I don't think
Conscious-
consciousness is
there's another
the
one.
collection of all those things.
Perceiving, apprehending, or noticing with a degree of controlled thought or observation.
A degree of controlled thought or observation. So that I mean,
I wasn't too off.
well, it has to do with the level of
The ultimate...
sagacity.
The ultimate... I know I'm using the same word to define it, but conscious as in not in a sleep, coma, or stupor.
Yes.
Perception of your reality.
Yeah, that's fine.
That is consciousness, yes.
But that's like the bottom of.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what it is, though.
Okay, I
for
thought
sure.
you. Well, it's not.
No,
I thought you were combining sentience and sapience,
I
and that's
am,
consciousness. But it's like
at the bottom level, that's what it is.
Well, I mean, there's being conscious,
Sapience
and then there
isn't
is
at the
a
bottom.
consciousness.
Yes.
One is a state, another is a thing.
True. They can both be. Yes.
I mean, you can have a consciousness without being conscious. I mean, we
Right.
all go unconscious for about 6 to 8 hours a night, but we can't say we don't have a consciousness
Correct.
when we're unconscious.
Correct. Even though we are
So-
asleep, we are still a being and still doing. We're still processing. We are still learning. We are literally coding short-term memory into long-term memory. We are configuring.
when you said that, what I pictured
I
in
always
my
thought it
head
was
was that meme of the guy that's just like, I guess.
what's I always thought that, like, I know this isn't the case, but I always compared it to back in the day when you had to defragment drives on computers.
You still
That's
have
what
to
we
do
were
that.
doing when we were sleeping.
Oh yeah.
And I once watched one of these things all day long going, and
I mean,
then when
I
I
guess you-
slept, I saw the defragmenting.
I mean, I guess you
going
could
on.
argue that humans, when we are unconscious, we are still consciously decoding and coding our days, processing information, and able to take the things that we have acquired or interpreted in that short-term time into long-term code, if you will, in our brain to retrieve it to a more recent time.
I wouldn't say we're
without-
consciously doing that.
But you do it. when you
Yeah,
sleep.
I'm not saying I don't do it. I'm just saying I don't think I'm doing that on purpose.
Your brain does this so eloquently that the moment the word leaves your lips, it is already 16 trillion milliseconds. That's too much, but a lot of milliseconds ahead of where we are. Your brain is like beautiful code being
I
written.
know my brain is beautiful. It's other people's that I'm worried about.
See, we're just getting back to you think, but
Do
you don't.
really think? I'm just pointing out from the biophysical state
I know.
that the
You don't have thoughts.
the
Thoughts have you.
But the action potential axonal coding, if you will, of brain higher executive functioning is impressive.
It's true. We still don't really have all that much of a great explanation of dreams, though. Like, I guess the significance of dreams.
We could go into another time on like REM
Dreams
versus
are a whole other
non-REM.
podcast.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, foods that
Libraries have been written on the
nightmares,
subject.
Drinks and that elicit nightmares, drugs that elicit nightmares. You know, there's all sorts of things.
I will say that my dreams have become far more clearly representative and metaphorical and meaningful since the derealization than they were before. Because you remember what kind of dreams I had. They're, I guess, the kind of dreams I'm known for having, were just ridiculous nonsense bullshit.
Filled with celebrities.
Filled with
Yours were always filled with
They're-
oddly specific celebrities.
Yeah, that's true. Dean Martin and Sylvester Stallone were in the same dream one time. And then there was that one where I was wrestling, I was in a fight with Bruce Willis, and I asked my brother for help, and he was like, "You're on your own." And then I got
That is a fair
coffee
response.
table blast over my head.
Yeah. Was he barefoot, though?
I don't remember.
I mean, he gains his powers barefoot.
Yeah.
Specifically with glass in
That's
them.
right. And blood. I mean, come on. They go hand in hand.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Motherfucker.
I lost that fight.
Having a table smashed over your
That's the
head.
important lesson from this dream. I lost the fight.
Against
Yeah.
Bruce Willis. And now we're coming full circle.
We are. I will say we are hitting our time mark of. Well,
Another 40
boys
minutes.
and girls, we've reached the end of our journey. I'm not really sure what this voice is, but I'm going with it. I'd say a little bit Mr. Rogers, a little bit Lindsey Graham on crack.
I can see that. I was going to say somewhere between Mr. Rogers and Paula Dean.
Oh man, all I need is some paprika and a stick of butter and a dash of the N-word. I do not support Paula Dean.
I was thinking Dana Carvey's
Oh,
Oh,
George W.
yeah.
Bush.
Oh,
That's what I was going
okay.
with.
Oh, I was thinking.
Okay,
of
yeah,
like,
that's a
well,
blend
isn't
of-
that special.
Yeah, the church lady.
Yeah.
Could it be?
So we're
Satan.
gonna take another break, and I hope you enjoy
Way to
our
wrap it.
sponsors. They pay us no money. We support them, or we advertise of the goodness of our hearts. So we rely on you to support the podcast. If you want, I'm not going to be pushy about it.
Made
do it.
possible by viewers like you.
Maybe.
Maybe.
This episode brought to you by Story Porpoise, the Cetacean Translation Foundation. Please enjoy this sample of Jane Goodall's In the Shadow of Man. Free for the next 30 days in Flipper's autobiography, Sharks Ain't Shit, with a special foreword by Elijah Wood.
All right, what a thrilling advertiser we had. So to bring it back, on the topic of identity, what did we learn?
Holy shit, we were supposed to be learning?
I
Did we
mean,
learn anything?
I think we what we think we learned, at least, barring better arguments, was that the validity of identity is multivariate. It depends on whether or not you're dealing with sapient creatures.
Are you a conscious being that can perceive identity?
Right. Or are we dealing with inanimate objects? And if we're in any one of those cases, we have to figure out. There are so many contingencies. Like there's so many contingencies on whether or not something has definitely if something has meaning, definitely if something has purpose, probably if something has identity. Although we kind of blew that one out of the water too.
So
Because we decided or discovered whatever that identity. A thing can have identity even if there's nothing around to perceive that thing, because identity would be what's the right word? Identity would be contingent on differentiation and nothing else.
at that point,
Yeah. Once things are differentiated, you have identity. But that's one of those thinkable but not knowable
right?
situations.
So, does anyone at this table now have a better understanding of their own identity after this conversation?
No, absolutely.
All right, Kirky, you answered first.
Well, I have a unique perspective as a bedside ICU nurse in America, in that I see often a vessel without an identity, if you will, a physical being without a sense, or without a person to show me who they are. I see people on ventilators and who are comatose or near comatose quite often. And when we discussed this, I came to that conclusion when I brought up the point that, it's not just one thing that makes you you. It's a multifaceted thing that makes you you. With the Dateline example, with people like that, when they say that's just not who that person is. There are a bunch of factors that come together that make you, give you an identity. It's not like, oh, she's right-handed, or oh, he has blue eyes. You know, it is a...
They are still this person in these ways.
Right. So what has helped me in this discussion is understanding where the conscious, the identity, ends and begins, in a sense. So from my bedside practice, or even in real life, to examples of the things we talked about, like the metaphorical tree in the woods and the Ship of Theseus and whatnot. I feel like I have a better understanding of what makes me, me, what makes Dave, Dave, what makes Garrett, Garrett, what the identity means in regard to human evolution.
Okay. Dave.
I have a much easier explanation for why I said no. I've already thought about all this a whole bunch. That's about it. I mean, and I feel bad saying this because I feel like kind of a pretentious prick.
Well, you can be at times.
Well, you
But
said
I've thought about all of it.
Well, just because you've thought about it doesn't mean you're right.
No,
Remember-
that's true. That's true. I've
Remember,
thought about all
ladies
of it.
and gentlemen and theys and non-binaries. He said it, not us.
True. But that's the truth. I think about that. Like, I don't know what everybody else thinks about in their free time, but this is the stuff that I think about constantly. Like this is inside my head at any given moment. Well, not all moments, but most of them. I'm still a boy.
I'm a real boy.
But yeah, I had already come to terms up to this point with the idea that my identity has a lot of layers to it as a person, and as a social person, and as a thing in space over time. Like all those different things, those are all different levels of what build up my identity, and they're not all contingent upon each other. Like we were talking about with the person who's laying like on a ventilator who's unconscious. Like the person is still that person, or with Phineas Gage.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, Phineas Gage.
Yes.
There's still like Phineas Gage is still Phineas Gage in certain ways. Just because one thing falls off doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I guess maybe the way to say that. So yeah, I've already come to terms with those ideas, I guess. Because I don't want to say I've already come to those conclusions because I might be wrong, like you said. But
It's okay to come to a wrong conclusion, Dave.
But
There are worse
I guess
things
maybe
in the
what I'm
world
saying
than
is
being
that
wrong.
yeah, the conversation that we've had about it was insightful, but didn't give me anything that would change what I've already come to understand about identity.
Okay.
That's fair, you know.
I'm kind of in Dave's boat on that one. It's good to know the theoreticals and the lines of thought that we've covered, but at some point the rubber's got to hit the road. So I'm still kind of in the same boat that I was before the conversation.
We can
And
change that.
get the lobotomy hammer.
Yes, but
Hammers
the
seem to
boat-
be something we've been talking about a
I
lot.
believe it's an ice
What boat
pick
are
you're
you
looking
on?
for.
Are you on? What boat are you on? Is it Theseus? Because we have a conversation about that. We could reference. Is that the same boat you're in?
What boat am I in on that one?
Are you riding Junior? Dave's face, for all you earballs out there, is impeccable.
In my head, I heard Phil Ken 7.
When it comes to which Ship of
Double
Theseus,
entendre.
I'm more likely to agree with Kirky and Dave on this, that the one that had the one that was in place and slowly being replaced, that is the original, as far as anyone's concerned, from my perspective. But there are other arguments that I think have weight. I can't say one way or the other definitively. When it comes to my own identity, I'm probably going to do the same thing that I've been doing for a while. Try and be the person I believe I am until it runs headlong into reality, and then readjust.
That's the hero's journey.
Huh. Good to know.
Pretty much. I mean, that is pretty much a boiled down version of the hero's journey. It's going to do what I do and think what I think until something completely fucking collapses me, and then I'll
It doesn't have
deal
to
with it.
completely collapse me, but it's like, okay, that doesn't work. Let's readjust what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And then that will become the new Garrett, who will then become the old Garrett until the new Garrett is born.
I think The Who had a song about that.
The Garrett is dead. Long live the Garrett.
Something like that.
All right. Was there anything else? I think we just kind of wrapped it up, kind of came full circle, and discovered that some of us learned things and some of us didn't. Well, that's not true. I mean, I learned things, but that doesn't mean I changed my understanding of identity.
You know, humans are an ever-evolving species, and maybe we don't learn things in the present moment, but we will come to learn those things about ourselves in time.
Yeah, maybe we just need to grok all
Kirky's
this.
You'll understand when you're older.
Now go to bed.
So I think we're going to wrap this episode up. Please join us next time when Dave teaches us how to disassemble a snowboat.